There was a man named Elias. He wasn't famous, wasn't important in the eyes of the world, wasn't someone who would stand out in a crowded street. He was just an ordinary man, until life broke him in an extraordinary way. He had a family, he had dreams, he had a job that, although simple, supported his home. He thought he knew where he was going. He believed his effort was enough to keep everything standing. But one day things began to fall apart. Not all at once, but in pieces, as if life were unraveling a single thread every day. First, he lost his job. Then he lost his peace. Then he lost friendships that swore loyalty. Then he lost motivation. And finally, he lost even the sense of who he was. The home that once echoed with voices became silent. The heart once filled with plans became heavy. And the faith once so light became a barely audible sigh. Elias walked the streets with slow steps, carrying thoughts that only someone who has suffered knows exist. Those thoughts that weigh, that suffocate, that make you believe morning will never come after the night. He looked at the sky and asked, "Where are you, Lord?" The question never came with anger. It came with exhaustion. Exhaustion from fighting alone. Exhaustion from trying to be strong for everyone. Exhaustion from being the last one holding the ruins of his own life. He couldn't explain when everything changed. He only knew that suddenly the places he sought support were empty. The hands that promised help became busy. The shoulders that once held him moved away, and the certainties that sustained him simply dissolved. In a cruel and silent way, life took him to a place no one wants to reach. The place where God is the only thing left. But that place, though it looked like the end, would become the beginning. Elias started walking at night. It was the only moment he could breathe. The empty streets, the cold air, the distant lights. Everything felt more honest than the people around him. During one of these walks, he sensed something strange. The silence wasn't empty. It had weight, a presence, a kind of warmth hard to explain. At first, Elias thought it was just his mind trying to find comfort. But the more he walked, the more he realized that something or someone was there. One night, passing a park bench, he sat down. He felt the cold wood against his back, held his head in his hands, and let thoughts escape without control. There, in that quiet place, for the first time in a long time, he cried. Not a quick or discreet cry, but a deep, exhausted cry, worthy of a heart holding the weight of the world alone. And in the middle of that cry he heard, not with his ears, but with his soul, a gentle voice, almost a whisper inside his chest. "I am here." Elias immediately lifted his head, looked around, startled. But no one was there. The voice didn't repeat, but he felt it, and that was enough. God didn't come with thunder. He didn't come with explanations. He didn't come with ready-made answers. He came with presence, a presence that doesn't need words because it speaks to the soul. A presence that doesn't push, but sustains. A presence that doesn't demand, but offers. Elias realized for the first time that maybe he had never truly heard God before, because he was always surrounded by noise. Noises of fear, expectations, pressures, people, himself. Only when everything collapsed did the silence open. And in the silence, God spoke. Not with phrases, but with existence. The days continued to be difficult. Nothing on the outside changed quickly, but something inside him began to transform, and that is always the first change God makes. Elias began speaking to God simply, almost childlike. "I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I have no strength. I'm tired, God. So tired." He expected miraculous answers. He expected a light, a sign, a dramatic intervention. But God didn't respond the way Elias wanted. God responded the way he needed. Elias realized he woke up with a little more peace, felt less weight in the morning, felt less fear at night. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One day, while walking again through the park, Elias had a profound revelation. Not a vision, but an understanding. Maybe I lost everything, to learn that I never needed anything but the Lord. The thought was so deep, so unexpected, that he had to stop walking. He understood that God had not taken everything from him, God had taken everything that kept him from seeing God. Some pains are not punishments. They are surgeries. They are spiritual detox. They are necessary cuts so the heart can live again. Elias realized that, for the first time in his life, he was completely dependent on God, and he discovered that dependence wasn't humiliation. It was privilege, because whoever depends on God has what the world cannot give and what the world cannot take. Elias's restart didn't begin with open doors. It began with an open heart. He didn't see it, but God was rebuilding everything, not outside, but inside. Elias's heart, once full of fear, began to be filled with a strange faith that made no sense. A faith that said, "I know God is with me, even when I see nothing happening." This is the most powerful kind of faith, the faith that blooms when there are no flowers, the faith that stands when everything else has fallen. Weeks passed, and Elias felt a new desire to believe again, to believe in himself, to believe in the future, to believe God would not let him fall. One morning after a difficult night, he woke up with something different inside. Not strength, not hope, but conviction. Conviction that God still had plans. Conviction that the desert was a path, not a destination. Conviction that he hadn't yet seen God's best. Elias rose, washed his face, and whispered, "Lord, I have nothing. But if I have you, then I have everything." And that was the day everything truly began. No change is fast, but God works at the perfect rhythm. Without Elias noticing, things began to align. An old acquaintance met him by chance and offered temporary work. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Elias accepted with gratitude. He worked with humility, care, and thankfulness, and everything he touched seemed to carry a different light, though he didn't realize it. People noticed. They noticed the peace. They noticed the gentleness. They noticed the quiet strength that only someone who walks with God carries. The owner of the company, impressed, offered him a permanent job. Months later, a raise. Then, more responsibilities. Not because he was the most qualified, but because he carried something no one could explain. Something not learned in any course. Something forged by suffering. Something shaped in silence with God. Some called it luck. Others called it talent. Elias knew its name: grace. Elias rebuilt his life, but not the way he had imagined. He was no longer the man full of perfect plans. He was the man full of deep faith. He no longer tried to control everything. He learned to rest. He no longer feared losing everything. He knew that even if he lost it all, he would never lose God. And Elias realized he had won, but not in the way the world defines victory. He won when he found peace in chaos. He won when he found God in loss. He won when he discovered that the essential is not what we hold in our hands, but what we hold in the soul. Life didn't become perfect again, but it became deep. It became lighter. It became meaningful. And he learned something he would carry forever. The greatest victory is not having everything. The greatest victory is having God and needing nothing else to be whole. Years later, when his life was fully rebuilt, Elias kept one habit: walking at night, just as he did in his days of pain. But now, the silence wasn't a refuge of suffering. It was a place of gratitude. Sometimes he sat on the same bench where he once cried many nights, closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered, "Thank you for never leaving me, even when I thought I was alone." And he understood. God didn't arrive when Elias lost everything. God had never left. The pain only removed the noises that kept him from noticing. His victory wasn't a big achievement. Not wealth, not fame, not recognition. His victory was finding the presence of God. The presence that heals, restores, renews, sustains. The presence that is with you now, as you read these words. The same presence that was with Elias in his loneliness. The same that lifted him when he had no strength. The same that guided him when he had no direction. The presence that remains. The presence that heals. The presence that never arrives late. The presence of God. If you've read this far, maybe you're also walking through a desert. Maybe you've lost things, people, strength, dreams. Maybe you're holding what's left of your heart with trembling hands. If that's the case, this story isn't only about Elias. It's about you, about someone who looks around and feels they only have God, about someone who is, perhaps without realizing, about to discover that this is enough, because God is never little, never late, never almost. God is everything, and whoever has everything, you already know the answer. Elias's victory wasn't the final point. It was only the beginning of a life led by God's presence. He learned that the desert isn't a place of death. It's a place of revelation. It's where God whispers because we finally become silent. And he learned that the emptiness that hurt so much was simply the space God was preparing to fill. Elias won, but not because he was strong. He won because he learned to fall at God's feet. He won because he discovered that God's presence is greater than any loss. He won because he found meaning where once there was only pain. And every evening as the sun sets, he repeats the phrase that marked his story. The phrase only those who have walked with God in the dark can understand. I had only God, and he was always enough. If this message spoke to you, if God touched your heart through these words, don't let this moment pass. Stay here. Walk with us. Let God continue speaking to you. Subscribe to this channel and let each new video remind you that you are not alone. You never were, and you never will be. Share this message with someone who needs to feel God's presence today. You may be the answer to someone's prayer. And remember, when everything feels dark, when everything seems lost, when you feel like you only have God, that is exactly when miracles begin.